are going into part 2 of a most fabulous show, which will help me and you with our relationships with anyone. Please watch part 1 of this series where Christine Bacon goes into what the acronym SACRED means. Last show we went into S and A, and we're not going to tell you what those are because that's something that was already done. Now, Christine Bacon, before we go into this, can you please tell the listeners, viewers, what you do, how great it is? Because I know, being your friend, that you've helped so many people and that your talks are fabulous, and the way you help, especially couples and people who've lost a spouse, not due to death, but due to that spouse saying bye-bye. You have done wonders. So just let people know how to find you right off the bat if they're looking for that kind of help.
Well, thank you, Christine. I save marriages for a living, and I tell people, not I, but God through me. It's the mission He's given me to save 1 million marriages before I die. And so, as you said, I work with people who are planning to marry, engaged couples, people who are married, and people who are in broken marriages. And where only one of them is desiring to reconcile. So there are strategies. A lot of people say, well, my spouse needs to change. I can't change their mind. I just need to stress that if you change, they change. And so I absolutely can work with you. As much as this can be theoretical, there are tangible strategies for practical strategies for what you can do. So people can find me. And I do thank you, Christine, because I'm honored. You can find me at my website, which is breakfastwithbacon.com. That's the name of my radio show that I do when I'm not with Christine Watkins. So find it under breakfastwithbacon.com or drchristinebacon.com. They'll both lead you to the same place, and you can just sign up there or contact me through there if you're confused and tell me a little bit about what you're dealing with. I will respond back to you, and I will respond back to you. I do not have my staff do that because that part is too important to me. So breakfastwithbacon.com, I'd be honored to help you save your marriage. And one last thing is I'd be completely honored if you'd bring me in to speak at your company or your church, because if I can work interactively with couples or with individuals, it is just the thing God gave me. I don't like to say the word the gift because it presumes how it's what I love doing. It's my mission. So I come in and I teach not only couples, but I have learned through years of doing this that the same formula, the sacred formula that teaches couples to be extremely happily married, is also the same formula that teaches a customer service rep to be an amazing customer service rep, or a leader, a boss, a CEO. Because, and I know Christine said we weren't going to tell you what the S and A were, but I'm going to tell you the S stood for selflessness. And if you are a selfless leader, you are going to be having a higher morale in your company. If you are a selfless customer service rep, the outcomes are tremendous. But enough of what I do.
Let's go. So we did S. She spilled the beans. You could spill the A beans now that it's all just.
That's right. So super couples were extremely selfless. And then we talked about attentiveness, which is super couples paid attention to that which their spouses did well, as opposed to many of us who pay attention to what our spouses do poorly. Again, consider applying that to a workplace, right? Then the next letter is C, which is communication. And everybody who knows me probably knows that my PhD is in communication. And Christine, this is to me, it's like the richest part, because the biggest chapters of my book are on communication. And I break it down by gender as well, because there are absolutely structural and hormonal differences in the male and the female brain, and therefore the way that they communicate. So
and you showed up your book, since you mentioned it, but I don't know if everyone, yes, there we have the book.
The Super Couple, a formula for extreme happiness in marriage.
Great. So yes, please tell us about some of those differences, because they affect how we communicate. I know that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I love my husband, but the one part I love teaching, I just taught a class last night to a large group of college students, and none of them was married. They were all dating. And I started to revalidate the differences between the male brain, which, let's just go with the structures. So we have the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, the corpus callosum down the middle, which allows us to send the messages from the left brain to the right brain. All of us are the same while we're in our mother's wombs. But the male baby, at some point when he in his mom's womb gets a shot of testosterone, which singes these pathways in the corpus callosum, which means the male brain's left hemisphere and right hemisphere don't talk to each other as much.
So all male brains are basically destroyed very young. That's what we want to get across.
Destroyed.
It's a serious thing. We need to pray.
Let's. Every man watching the show, we're kidding.
No,
we're kidding. Please don't. Please don't say what Christine Bacon and Christine Watkins said.
Your beautiful brains.
Beautiful brains. But it is beautiful because God made our brains different. And Christina, think about that. He could have made our brains exactly the same, and he didn't. On purpose. And so with that severing of this corpus callosum, which sends these messages from the left brain to the right brain, the woman is, let me start with the man, actually. He's easier. Don't joke, right? But the male, because he's had the singeing, he goes to a certain place in his brain. Let's just say topic. If he's talking about finances and he's right here in this part of his brain, he will stay there until that conversation on finances is done. It's like, okay, we figured it out, got the bills done, check the box. Now let me go to another box in my brain, which is often the nothing box, which I love talking about the nothing box. There is a chapter in my book that talks about the nothing box in the male brain. And it's a man's favorite place to be because he's like, I can think of absolutely nothing at any point. Like what? Every woman I've met, I mean, Christine, I know you're pretty smart. You've written a lot of books, but did you know, and I want your actual serious answer, did you know that men can be thinking about absolutely nothing at any given point? Like their brain can be like off and they're wide awake and thinking about nothing. Did you know that they could do that?
No.
Like nothing.
Really nothing?
Like they'll watch a TV commercial and I'm like, but you're at least thinking about, the beer or you're thinking about the tool that they're advertising. And guys are like, nope. I'm like, come on, you're watching the Green Bay Packard game and the guy just threw a touchdown and you're at least thinking about the end zone or like, nope. So, and I'm like, nothing? And like, no, when we turn our brains off, we can just literally go, and I mean, we've all seen it, right? The remote control, right? The guy just sits there and every woman in the world is envious. We're like, what? You can turn your brain off? Because we can't turn our brains off.
It's impossible.
It's like you're thinking even when you're trying not to think. Sometimes when you're sleeping, you're thinking so much. I would say this is why most of the women are annoyed when guys would like flick the channels and their brains are literally not connecting. But the women, even if it's a split second of a Doritos commercial, our brain engages that. And then you flip to a political ad and then you flip to another ad and we're like, and our brains are connecting. We're like, stop flicking the channels. And guys are like, dude, why does it bother you, right? I mean, but this is one of the differences. So in our communication with each other, if a man and a woman doesn't understand these differences, we're going to have a lot of conflict. So if the woman, for instance, is talking about finances, honey, we need to talk about the bills. You're happy, he's happy. Good marriage, good conversation. Everybody's in a great mood. And I'm like, well, okay, so I was talking about the budget and I was thinking that we need to start saving some money because we need to plant that new garden in the back. And by the way, when we do, you know what? Lowe's is having a sale on flowers. Let's make sure we get those flowers today. It's like, and I've got to pay the Lowe's bill because the bills just came in. Did you know that the interest rates went up to 20% on them? It's like, this is ridiculous because those guys are like jerks. I can't believe that they did that. It's like, I'm trying to pay my bills on time and I try to get a good interest rate. And it's like, and you know what, Sally, when she was doing her, she hired this financial person. And you know what they did? Do you think we should get a financial person? And you're all over the place. Now, every female in the world is tracking. She's following. Oh, yeah, got this. Every guy's like, are we still talking about the budget? Because they're like, I'm still in that one box right there. So we women, I'm trying to keep this, short so that you can go to the book and read about this. But in all seriousness, women make all these connections and think our guys are following us. And you know what? We'll often attribute to them this lack of desire. You don't love me. You don't care. You're not listening. When that's not the case at all. Again, when I talk to men, they're like, I want to be able to listen. I want to be able to follow my wife. But they literally tune out. It comes to a point, and it's an average of like this 20 minutes where I'm trying really hard, trying to follow, and it just goes too many places, and the brain goes, boo.
I've met other men who can multitask, do several things at once. So I think there are variations within a theme.
And there are variations, right? And so when I do speak in all seriousness, I'm talking about the rule and not the exception. So whenever we say any of these gender things, we're talking about 66% of men and 66% of women. So yeah, there is a deviation, but you have 3 sons. So you've probably noticed a little bit of similarities in there as well. It's like one place, one conversation, and otherwise they're kind of lost. So that is just one element of the differences between the male and the female conversation. Is women tend to be more circular, men tend to be more direct, and it produces different outcomes in our hormones, our testosterone and our oxytocin, based on how we say what we say. But Christine, I could talk about communication forever. Just know that super couples said communication is key in their having a good relationship, because if you take the S that we talked about on our first broadcast, if I apply selflessness to this whole formula and I go, okay, Christine, Danny is not you. Try to stick with one topic. Try to communicate the way Danny would have you communicate. And then Danny selflessly would be thinking, okay, she's not trying to annoy me. She's not trying to overwhelm me. This is just the way God made her. If we choose those thoughts, attentiveness, we can more lovingly say, babe, I'm trying so hard, but I'm not following you. And that's what produces the outcome that we're looking for, is that you love me enough, I love you enough, we'll make this work. And we can make it work.
So let's move to the R. You've done communication, and there's so many other points in Christine's fabulous book. And if she ever speaks, watch her speak, because it's hilarious, it's engaging, it's helpful, and she's helped so many people in their relationships, saved so many marriages. But it's not just about marriage; it's about communication with anyone, and especially between the sexes, when there are these differences, whether you have a male boss or a female boss, and you can't figure why you're not seeing eye to eye. But let's move on to R. What does the R stand in this sacred formula for relationships?
R is huge. R is respect. As I don't know if I alluded to before, but when I interviewed my couples and I said, what do you think are the elements? The super couples mentioned a couple things, but in the sacred formula, I'm the one that witnessed and said, I see selflessness. I see the, attentiveness. But communication was one of the things that the couples themselves mentioned. Communication's key. They also mentioned the R, which is respect. They said you have got to have respect in your marriage. And Christine, our society is absolutely void of respect. It started about 30, 40 years ago. But I'm 56 years old, and I remember watching political debates, and they used to oppose each other, but there was a basic respect for the other person, and that is gone. It's just absolutely gotten to where we demean each other. Let me tell you that I want to read specifically the definition of respect is esteem for, or a sense of the worth or excellence of a person. Esteem for. So this is basically taking our Catholic values and thinking to ourselves, whether I like you or not, whether I agree with you on your politics, on your religion, on your, medical status, you are still made in the image and likeness of God. And we can disagree, but I will never demean you. I will never belittle you. I will never disrespect you. And that has crept into our marriages, this epic levels of disrespect. We don't know how to talk to each other anymore. We speak in ways that our grandparents would have never spoken to each other, even in their bad marriages. Mm-hmm. And what's really proof of that too, Christine, is when I talk to couples and I ask them about the ways they've said things, and often I'll say to them, would you have phrased it that same way with your grandmother? And they're like, no. And you can see them actually do no, I wouldn't. And I'm like, why? Well, this is my grandma. I'm like, go deeper. I don't want to hurt her. But you want to hurt your spouse? And you get convicted as soon as that line of reason starts going. So respect in super couple marriages, they esteem one another um, to beautiful proportions. This was one of the ones that actually convicted me most when I was interviewing them. I was able to see my epic levels of disrespect for my husband. I don't know when it started. I don't know how it started, quite possibly because we respect one another when we first get married or start dating. But over time, if they hurt you, even if it's accidental, you kind of hurt them back. And then we develop this pattern in many of our marriages where, well, screw you, or I don't like you, or you're a jerk, or that's not esteeming the value or worth of another person. So we do there. The good news is we can teach you how to respect. And I go deeply into that in the book based on what super couples have said and based on what I have observed. And again, I always want to reiterate, it has transformed many, many marriages, starting with my own. We were separated for 4 years, filed for divorce, dealt with infidelity, and yet we've just celebrated our 38th anniversary, and we are very happily married. If God can change my marriage, he can change any marriage, and that's why these principles are so important and practical. I can teach you how to be respectful, how to communicate. Sorry.
And what I'm hearing some people watching this thinking, well, but my husband or my wife or my ex-husband or ex was totally abusive. You couldn't change him, or completely narcissistic. So I want to acknowledge that some things are so broken that and so dangerous that you have to get out of the situation. You have to separate for safety. So we're not talking about ones that have become a level of addiction or evil that's absolutely out of control, because at that point you go to Codependent Anonymous, or you go to you deal with that in a different way. But that is not most of the world, thank God, right now.
Praise God, yes.
Praise God that most people in relationships can, by their own becoming more like Jesus, becoming more sacred. I mean, is it not true that Jesus changed so many people? There's some he couldn't. But a lot of what Christine Bacon is saying is taking on ways of dealing with people the way that Jesus dealt with people.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm glad you said that, because, a lot of people say, well, you're so pro-marriage. What about in those cases of abuse? It's kind of like when you're talking abortion, and they're always like, well, what about the case of rape and incest? We always want to go to those extremes. And while those extremes exist, you're right, Christine, it's not the vast majority. There's a difference between mean and abusive. And a lot of couples have a mean spouse, but that can change. And it is amazing how God made us, because if I change my behaviors, because we are literally, one flesh, if we're speaking specifically to the marital relationship, not maybe the, boss to employee or things like that. But if I'm always doing A and he always responds with B, if now I change my output to C, well, how do I handle that? You're supposed to do A because I know how to handle that. But I'm doing C. So he has to, or she has to produce D. And it's a little bit awkward, a little bit uncomfortable at first, but it's productive. And that's what had to happen in my own marriage and the many marriages I talked to. When Christine Bacon started respecting, when Christine Bacon started speaking more kindly, when I stopped yelling, when I listened better, when I did any of these strategies, when I became selfless, Danny naturally had to change. And it just produces this great turning of a cycle that used to go one direction, and then slowly we started getting it going another direction in our marriage. Not yet super, but we're very happy. I'll let you know when we're extremely happy.
So we've done SACR. What is E?
E is really exciting, because I went into this thinking, so the question that started the E was, a pessimist couldn't possibly be married to an optimist. All these super couple marriages must be an optimist married to another optimist. Well, that wasn't true. As I was interviewing them, Most couples were one optimist and one pessimist, which is so cute too, because they always defended each other. Neither of them would put the other one down. And the pessimist would be like, well, I'm more of a realist, and the optimistic spouse would never throw him or her under the bus. They'd say, well, you're good at bringing me. I mean, yes, I'm very optimistic, but you're good at keeping me balanced and on everything. And I'm listening to them going, boy, even as a pessimist, you guys are just really loving on each other. Well, so I'm going, well, that can't be it. And I had to keep analyzing. This was one of the toughest ones. And after several more interviews, I was like, oh, this isn't about pessimism and optimism. What I was witnessing in their marriages was encouragement versus discouragement. E was huge. Again, all these things were huge, but E was so huge in these marriages because super spouses were each other's greatest encouragers. Here's an example. And my husband knows I talk about this now, so we kind of, I had my weak areas, extremely selfish. He's more of a pessimist. So he fell a little into the discouragement side without realizing it. So, oh yeah, I believe you can write a book, but most books don't do well. Yeah, sure, you could start a business, but most businesses do fail.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like,
my first book was,
and I didn't realize that everything I tried to do, my husband, because he's so logical and so, bottom line, and he's actually military, right? So 20 years in the Navy, he went for the sure thing. But he didn't realize that in going for the sure thing, anything that was not sure, like writing a book or starting a business, he was kind of knocking down. And it was so discouraging. It made me not want to do those things. Well, super spouses are like, okay, there was one, Trisha and Jim. And Trisha and Jim were the youngest super couple that I had interviewed. They were, I think, just at 31-ish. And so Jim said, I could come home and tell Trisha, I feel like running for the mayor of Virginia Beach. And Trisha would go, wow, that's big. But you know what? If anybody can do it, Jimmy, you can do it. You're awesome. You've got a good head on your shoulders. You've run a business. Why not? Right? And so you'd watch them. And everything they do encourages the other one. And I do remember one of my super couples who also happened to be a friend of mine. She recognized something in my own marriage at one point. And she goes, Christine, because I don't ever think I had low self-esteem, but I didn't believe in myself professionally. I was like, I don't know if I could ever do business. She's like, that's your husband's job. He's supposed to be encouraging you. And I was like, yeah, I guess you're right. So fortunately, it was a lesson he learned in that, honey, I need you to build me up. Because all of you watching this, you are your own best critic. You know all your areas of failure. You know all of your weaknesses. You don't need someone else pointing them out. If you don't recognize them, it's different, right? Like the alcoholic who doesn't realize they're an alcoholic. That's not what I'm talking about. But we are talking about, I know my flaws. I need you to help me realize that I can climb that mountain or run that marathon or start that business or whatever it is you have to do. Christine, is your husband encouraging of you, or is this so? How does this? I probably shouldn't ask you on the air, right? But encouragement plays out. You guys have said encouraging things, I've heard. So this is what we do, ladies and gentlemen. Christine and I challenge one another to be real because everybody can do D. D is deliberateness.
Okay.
D ties this all together. And that was something I remember Brooke said in an interview. I said, Brooke, you guys are just so, in love. First of all of my super couples were, but I said, you're so selfless. Were you always that way? She goes, Christine, I am human. We are just as selfish as anybody else. But she goes, you know what? I wake up every day and I think to myself, I married Chuck, and Chuck is a good man. And if I want to keep him and if I want to make him happy, I'm going to have to work at it because it's not natural to be selfless. So she said, I'd have to train myself to get up and make him that cup of coffee that he would have made himself out of love, out of selflessness. I would have to shut up and listen as opposed to talking, because that's a selfless thing to do. So she was deliberate at choosing to strengthen that area. So Christine, your husband, you, me, Danny, everyone, I was completely selfish. If I had to pick my worst, because I was a cheerleader, I was the captain of 3 sports, I'm a motivational speaker. So encouragement is my gig. It's what I do. But when it comes to selflessness, I watched these couples, and I have to tell you, that's the one I was most convicted on, which to me is the biggest one in this formula. Christ calls me to be selfless, put others' needs before myself. And I was always worried about, why don't you buy me flowers? Why don't you call me more often during the day? I would go for the biggest piece of cake. I never thought of someone else. I would, when I had my cheerleaders, when I was coaching cheerleaders years ago, and we'd go to a competition, and then, at the end of the competition, all the girls had to sit together for a group photo. I'd be like, go sit in the front, go quick, run up there and grab the front row. I mean, all the other cheerleaders from other schools probably wanted that slot too, but it wasn't that I was mean. It wasn't that I was trying to hurt somebody else. I didn't even think about it. Let's be first. Someone's got to be first. So in my marriage, though, I was convicted at my epic levels of selfishness because they're concealed. They don't look selfish to others. I had a soul search and see that myself. So yeah, I'm sure you have an area that you're weak in.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to leave the viewers with, is to think, okay, let me review these. Hopefully watch the first video, which is awesome in the way that Christine Bacon talks about what these couples were like and gives the background of her research for the Super Couple book and is so helpful. But in reviewing this, we have S for
selflessness.
And A for
attentiveness, paying attention to what your spouse does well.
To what your spouse does well. And that's one that I was convicted on very much so. I think there's a big A that I need to look at. And C, communication. And I would recommend reading her book, The Super Couple by Christine Bacon, to really learn more about communication. We went over one aspect of it was we women tend to, 66% of us anyway, talk in circles and around things and make connections and have a spaghetti brain. And men tend to have an iron single subject brain, work on that track and then go to the next track and then the next track. And this causes friction unless we realize, wait, that person isn't deliberately trying to annoy me. And then we have R, which is respect. And then E, encouragement. And D, which I think that was wonderful the way you said it, sums it all up, because deliberateness means you actually want to and will try to work on the deficit that you found as you review the letters. What is it? Where is it? And it doesn't have to be marriage. It could be any relationship that you feel is suffering in some way or needs a little boost, or even it's good and you want to make it great. If these things are missing, there is a lack of greatness in the relationship. And you know what? You're only going to be judged on your own behavior, not your spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or child. That's their journey to go through. But if we do our best with these, oh my goodness, that's also part of our trip to heaven.
Yeah, one of the last things I remember in that conversation with Brooke and Chuck is when Brooke was talking about that deliberateness, what she said is what's kind of awkward at first does become natural. So if you are deliberate about selflessness, eventually you do become selfless in that relationship. And that's the encouraging part, is that it won't always be uncomfortable. It won't always be hard. Danny and I, it was very hard in the beginning, but now there is a beauty because I know that he's always trying to please me and I'm trying to please him, and it makes it actually contagious. I want to outdo him in, well, let me quick get up and do something nice. So don't be discouraged, and do not think that your relationship is so far gone that it won't help your relationship. I don't like saying, again, what's on the back of this book, but it says her own marriage was so painful that Dr. Christine Bacon actually prayed for her husband to die. It was so painful. And to think that I could be on my knees saying, God, please make him die. It hurts so bad. The fights we would have, the conflict. And there's a whole chapter in conflict in communication, because communication and conflict are synonymous. But to think that it could go from there to oh my gosh, if my husband ever died, I'd be so sad. If it can change my marriage, it can change yours. Please don't give up. With Christ, all things are possible.
Amen. So let us pray. Let us ask God for the grace and the gift and the willingness, the deliberateness in using our own free will in trust and not getting discouraged if a person doesn't change right away. That'll set us back, and then we'll just be resentful. But trying and trying again and trying again. So Lord Jesus, thank you for coming into this broadcast. Thank you for showering the viewers with your presence and your wisdom through Christine's words. I ask that if there's anyone out there who is afraid to take a step forward, that they would find the courage to implement these ideas, that if they feel called to reach out to Christine for help, that they take that next step. Lord, you wish to heal all our relationships. Our divisions are a result of original sin and our own sin. You never meant it to be that anyone wouldn't get along, but yet we are in this fallen world, and all of us have to deal with the brokenness between us and among us. So heal, Lord. Heal our relationships. Heal our world. And may all of you find your way home. God bless you.
Amen.